Classics Confidential on location in Washington, D.C. It's with great pleasure that I welcome Mary-Kay Gamel and T.H.M.Gellar-Goad to Classics Confidential. We're going to be talking about teaching classical reception and particularly teaching performance, something that Mary-Kay knows a lot about since she's directed more than 30 productions of classical drama.
Not quite directed. I was involved in some way, translator, director, producer, dramaturg, all kinds of things.
So you are, a woman that wears a lot of hats.
I'm made of all works, yes, definitely.
Excellent. So tell us how that kind of feeds into your teaching and what experience we can offer to students in today's classroom.
Well, when I got involved in ancient drama, it was just like a revelation. It changed my whole career. I remained an associate professor for a very long time while I was retraining myself, but it really was just great because once I started thinking about ancient plays as scripts, as something that could be done now, it was a whole change of perspective. And as a result, I am not at all satisfied simply to read a play. I always want, when we're reading a play, I want to try out scenes in the class. I ask the students to get up on their feet. And it's amazing how much you can do even with books in hand. Just taking a position, knowing where to direct something, the tone of voice, the gestures, all those things. So that's the most obvious thing. And we do things like, there are lots of improvisation exercise you can do, and even for students that don't have any training, you give them something like a dialogue of two people. They come together and they say something like, hello, hello, been waiting ages. And you can and you can say those things, and you've got a scene very, very quickly. So even something that's not, it's not hard. It doesn't tend to be hard. And especially if there's nobody watching except their fellow students who are supposed to be, of course, supportive. But it's amazing. Things like, what you find out is if someone does not speak, but is on stage, if you have a character on stage, then you know that person is on stage. I mean, the example that comes to mind, it's not classical exactly, but Lavinia, after she gets her tongue torn out in Titus Andronicus, is on stage, and she can be an actor, she can do things, she can be involved, she's certainly reacting. But you never see that in the script, unless you can only find that out by performance.
A great example from classical literature is in Terence's Eunuchus. Pamphila is brought on stage, across stage, and she has one appearance as a slave being transferred from one household to another, and then the big turning point of the play is when she, being off stage, is raped by another character who's premeditated and goes off stage to do that, and comes back on in Celebration.
In Celebration.
In Celebration.
Right, exactly.
And the way that actor playing Philumena chooses to play his or her role as Philumena and going across the stage has profound implications for whether this is a comedy or a tragedy.
Right, and do you think that Eunuchus can be performed as a straight comedy?
Only by deforming the text as it's been handed down to us by parents.
Yeah, because none of the traditional characteristics of off stage rape are there. They're not drunk, they're not at a party. It's it's premeditated.
At the same time, the kind of person who can laugh at the stand-up comedy of Daniel Tosh who would probably laugh at Eunuchus also.
Well, that's good cause of discussion among the people watching. So
right.
Again, how performance. And then, of course, the other thing that one can do in performance is use videos. And I must say, I wish there were more, especially in comedy.
Yeah.
Comedy has too few videos. There are entirely too many of Oedipus the King, and not enough of Seven Against Thieves.
Too many also of Cicero's First Catilinarian by American
Videos?
high school Latin students.
Videos?
Yeah, it's a high school Latin assignment across the country. Deliveries of the first Catilinarian.
Well, okay. I guess if you believe in performance, then that's good too.
Well, I think it's fundamental to most, if not all, ancient texts, is that they were, most of the times that they were read aloud, whether by an individual in his own private study or in a public recitatio or performance.
Or even someone composing.
Absolutely.
That's very clear, though, that they learn things, and you learn things, people think, we reading silently, hear the words in our heads to some extent. Don't you have trouble when you don't know how something is pronounced?
Yeah, absolutely.
I find myself stopping and having to figure out how it's pronounced, even though I'm reading silently.
And the reason we have to be trained to speed read is because we have the voice going on in our heads, slowing us down.
Right, good point.
And I notice that students often, when they're reading a text that we assign them in class, they think of it in terms of beach reading, where they don't need to really engage with it on a deep level, they just need to get through the pages. And having them read it out loud, especially in a performative way, forces them to grapple with the meaning in a way that they might not otherwise, where they can pass over things like the word depilation, for instance, referring to what Euripides has to do to his kinsman in Thesmophoriazdousai. That is meaningless on the page to the average undergraduate who will pass over it as a complicated word that probably is important, but turn it into a scene in performance and suddenly you have to interrogate what exactly am I intending to be doing now?
And then what happens if you have to stage it?
Exactly.
Oh, was that fun? We did it, and of course we had curtains, and the guy playing, his name was the bro in our production. You could see his head, and there were people working on behind. All of a sudden,
one of my students grew a mustache just so he could shave it off in performance of
Dedication. And that's the other thing too, because people get so engaged in the most amazing ways, and ways you wouldn't expect. And the other thing too is that there's so many kinds of areas that you can use in performance. If students have talents in music, then they can sing or write music or perform, that sort of thing. If they're good at creating costumes, they can do the costumes. So it's short. It's a real way. And theater is such a collaborative, all performances, but theater especially, a collaborative art. And it brings out the best and it makes people bond together. It's wonderful.
And it's really fundamental to success in the world today to be able to work with people, especially people who you might not necessarily get along with. And well-implemented group work of any sort, but especially one that has an authentic, real-world, public, concrete product like a performance of a play or an adaptation or condensation of a play can really get students to learn their group work skills. And I have an article coming out in the 2014 issue of Cloylia about issues of successful implementation of group work, but also of gender and pedagogy in performance.
So performance, a great tool in the classroom, bringing the classical texts alive.
Yeah, and a great way to motivate students to engage in a much more deep way than they would, because they don't have an option. If they're performing, they have to know the meaning and they have to have some sense of the themes.
And it also is a great stimulus. I mean, audiences love performance. I mean, it's a way to interest people too, especially again, if you do things that are not the average, the thing we can all get videos of. If you do something that's really unusual, that attracts people.
Absolutely.
I teach at a private university, and so I view one of my goals as pushing my students out of their comfort zone and getting them to have experiences beyond their relatively privileged backgrounds. And one of the things that's really noteworthy is about 55% of my students across the times I've taught Greek and Roman comedy at a general ed level, 55% of my students have cross-dressed in public as part of this, and only one had previously cross-dressed prior to coming to my class.
Great, and new experiences.
New experience, new way of seeing the world, new way of thinking about the way they construct their own gender and the way our society and ancient societies construct gender.
Which is precisely what our role is as teachers, is to, push them out there and get them to do exciting new things.
And you often find out, even for your own self, what different kinds of meanings things can have that would never occur to you just in reading. Even if you're thinking about doing a performance. When I once directed I translated and directed a play of Rotsvik of Gandersheim, and she's just a fascinating playwright. And this play, most people think that her plays are very pious. I mean, she was an abbess, she was religious, obviously, but I think her plays are really subversive. And the one that we did, which was, the official title was Paphnutius, but it involves a pious man who goes to a famous courtesan and basically presents himself as a lover in order to try to help her. But it's the other way around, shall we say. And that's what, I never would have found that out. Well, I should say, I found that out when I was translating, but I certainly found it out when I was staging it with the students.
So performance is not just a great teaching tool, but it's also crucial to research for these genres. Without performing them, without thinking about them in terms of performance, you can't get a full understanding of the texts, and it's a really impoverished understanding of the playwrights and their culture.
Well, it's been great having you on Classics Confidential, talking about performance. Thank you.